There's a lot of conversation online about the state of Black relationships and marriage. Who's leading, who's submitting, who's too masculine, who's not masculine enough, why trust is low, and why partnership feels harder than it should. But maybe we need to look underneath the surface instead of pointing fingers. In the West, Black women are the most consistently Christian demographic, and Black men far less so. That raises an uncomfortable question. Are Black men and Black women even seeing the same Christianity? Because Christianity often teaches that men are called to lead their households. But what does it do to your psyche when your religion tells you you're supposed to be the head, while the history and imagery you've been shown rarely places people who look like you in positions of authority, authorship, or leadership? Can Black men trust that God made them to lead if every visual and cultural signal says leadership looks like a different man? And can Black women trust that vision either, if the story they've inherited quietly undermines Black men before the relationship even starts? Isn't it amazing how we can't know what they looked like when we're talking about people in the Bible and early Christian thought leaders? And how we can't know what they looked like automatically means keep them white? Because when Europeans painted these figures white for 800 years, that was just called tradition. But the moment you show them as brown or Black people, suddenly everybody turns into a forensic anthropologist. Here's the hard truth. Two things can be true at the same time. First, we can't recover exact phenotypes for most ancient people. That's real. And second, the white Christian visual tradition is not neutral. It's a power story. It trained people's imaginations, and it shaped who Christianity felt like it belonged to. Christianity spent centuries with its center of gravity inside European empire. An empire doesn't just spread beliefs, it spreads default images. And once an image becomes default, people start confusing it for history. Now, don't get me wrong. Other religions have image politics too. They do. But Christianity's global spread got braided into colonization in a way that made European looking feel accurate, even when it's geographically absurd. So yeah, that we can't know anything about what these historical figures look like often functions like a shield protecting the inherited white default. And here's what's really wild. Racism used the so-called curse of Ham to justify slavery. Even though Ham wasn't cursed in the Bible, Canaan was. Yet, notice how the story usually goes. Black people are in the Bible, they're Ham. And then the story basically begins and ends there. So let me ask the obvious question. If that's the explanation, where did all the Black folks go? Because the Bible keeps mentioning Cush, Egypt, and African peoples across the storyline. And the early Christian world was full of Africans and Eastern Mediterranean people long before Europe ever took over the visuals. And to be clear, for most ancient figures, we don't have portraits or photos, but we do have geography, and we do have population history, and we do know that medieval European art standardized a pale, straight hair look centuries later. So this isn't about claiming certainty. It's about correcting false certainty. Because if we can't know, why is the least historically likely look, the Northern European look, treated as acceptable certainty? Black and brown folks that reject Christianity aren't just reacting to doctrine. They're reacting to a centuries-long aesthetic ownership claim. Who's centered, who's holy, who's the default, and who's the background. And Christianity often gets experienced like, you can join, but you can't belong unless you accept our images, our culture, and our face as the face of God. You don't have to believe in Jesus to see what happened. A European empire repackaged a Middle Eastern and African faith and sold the remix as the original. That's not history, that's branding, and branding isn't always the truth. And notice the double standard. Simon of Cyrene, the man who carried Jesus' cross, can be called Black with little pushback. But call Mark, the gospel writer, whom tradition also links to Cyrene, Black, and suddenly everyone demands strict historical accuracy. And here's a question for you. When you picture Exodus, are you picturing European-looking Egyptians and European-looking Israelites too? So in your mental movie, are both the oppressed and the oppressors basically white? Because the story mostly takes place in Egypt and the Middle East, not medieval Europe. And let's be clear, Exodus isn't saying one race is God's good guys and another race is God's bad guys. God is judging oppression, not skin tone. So why did Christianity inherit a visual tradition where European looking becomes the default for biblical, even when it's geographically absurd? You don't have to believe in God to recognize when history has been manipulated. Just like you don't have to believe blues or rock and roll are your savior to correct someone who calls them white music. You don't have to believe Jesus is your savior to correct someone who says Christianity is the white man's religion.